So now that I finished Final Fantasy 16, it got me thinking, what else can they do with the Final Fantasy franchise? Because although Final Fantasy 16 was a PS5 game that was successful in terms of its own franchise, it wasn't as successful as other games from the past, especially at launch. It didn't even help that, Final Fantasy had a lot of controversy behind it and, divided opinions about the game. Also, that it was only a PS5 exclusive. And the last thing, that the game cost $70 on release, which, a lot of people might just wait for its sale, especially if they never played a Final Fantasy game. But what Final Fantasy did, which it's really good in my opinion, and that most people could agree on, is that it got new players into the series from this game, which, I think Square Enix was really aiming for that. And we could see, that was a success, introducing this game to a new variety of players that never played a Final Fantasy game. So what can they do to improve on that, to get more people into the Final Fantasy franchise more than they got here with Final Fantasy 16, and also get those, old Final Fantasy fans back into the series. But the most important thing is get those high selling numbers that it had back then on the previous games, because that name Final Fantasy deserves that high, selling number. So I've been thinking about this, and I think Square really needs to do a turn-based Final Fantasy, but a high-end quality one. And I know what people are thinking, they prefer more action, and also, action is the way to go and stuff like that people don't like turn-based RPGs anymore. But honestly, that's not even the case, because there's been a lot of different examples. So if they made a high-end turn-based Final Fantasy game, it doesn't need to be a mainline Final Fantasy. It could be a spin-off or something new they can create. Maybe, call it Final Fantasy turn-based, kind of like when they put Tactics on the name on Final Fantasy Tactics. Something like that, something different. It doesn't have to be the mainline. It could have a spin-off like that or something like that, right? So you can make a more traditional Final Fantasy, but obviously, more modern. And then what you do is put it on the Switch first, because we all know the Switch is an RPG selling machine and it has the biggest install base, Then later on you make a port for the PS5, PC, and Xbox. But the reason I say to put it on the Switch first is because on the Switch alone, it will sell crazy amount of numbers. Then when you port it over to a PC or PS5 or an Xbox, you get those bigger sales numbers as well. Also, the budget won't be crazy amount like Final Fantasy 16 was, because obviously, it would be made for the Switch, so the budget will not be as big as the Final Fantasy 16 or any other PS5 game or PC game. Sure, the graphics will take a hit, obviously, because it will be, on the Switch first. But as long as they make a high quality, good Final Fantasy turn-based and great art direction and gameplay, it will just overcome those graphics basically, Graphics are not the end-all be-all, And for the people that don't believe this idea and they don't believe, it won't sell good, there are perfect examples out there that we have right now. One of the biggest ones is Monster Hunter, where Monster Hunter has two different kinds of games, which is, Monster Hunter Stories and Monster Hunter Rise. And if you want, you could even include Monster Hunter World, which it's also different from all the other Monster Hunters because it's more, better graphics than the rest, So Monster Hunter Rise was only on the Switch at first, and then it got ported over recently on the PS5, Xbox, and PC. But just on the Switch alone, it sold a lot, basically, outselling most PS5 games, including Final Fantasy 16. It actually bodied it, where back then it would never outsell Final Fantasy, any game that's a Final Fantasy name, And then Monster Hunter Stories is a turn-based game, which is different than, the mainline Monster Hunter games. So it was a different take of the Monster Hunter franchise, and it also sold good, for the budget that it had. You could say it was a AA title, and I'm sure they made their money back and then some, But people might say, well, Square Enix already did turn-based games like Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default, and stuff like that, right? But the reason that that's not the same, it's because, it's not a Final Fantasy. Even though Octopath 1 for example, was a success and it was turn-based, right? If you just put the Final Fantasy name on a game that's maybe like the Octopath 1 or Octopath Traveler games, just by having the name alone will sell, double, maybe even triple of what Octopath sold, as long as the game is high quality and actually like a good game, good reviewed game and stuff like that. So I do think Square should invest more on traditional Final Fantasy games instead of investing on, for example, Forspoken or Diofio Chronicles or Valkyrie Elysium, games like that. Instead of doing that, which those games weren't as good selling wise, maybe they could focus on making more Final Fantasy games, making a turn-based Final Fantasy games, attract those old fans, right? Maybe get new fans from Final Fantasy 16 trying out this turn-based game, and I bet that if they would make a game like that on the Nintendo Switch, it would outsell Final Fantasy 16, even though the majority of people like supposedly action-based when, there's a huge market for traditional RPGs out there on the Nintendo Switch, But I'm just hoping, Square at least tries something different, make more Final Fantasy games other than just the mainline ones, because, there's no excuse that Final Fantasy should not be as big as, Zelda franchise or the Monster Hunter or even like Persona franchise. It should be up there with all those, big name games that sell 10 million plus, because Final Fantasy has a big history behind it, so there's no excuse on it not selling well. But what do you guys think? Would you like a new Final Fantasy from Square Enix, in more traditional based, or just keep the mainline games? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you next one. Peace.